So, thank you. This is about my third time coming up here to speak. I'm in an associate role here, and very excited to be here and to talk about this specific subject because I love communion. And the verse that Joe was able to give me was not just about communion, but we watch communion and history kind of connect with this verse. And I know everybody loves history so much, and you're going to be bored out of your minds. But get comfortable. They have extra coffee. Joe will take orders here in a moment. But when we look at this verse, I want to look at the first person. When we've had our readings this whole month, and we've gotten to hear from this person that's made this writings, and he has been imparted upon Paul, and Paul has gotten Luke to write this the gospel according to Luke, and he's phenomenal. He's detail oriented. He also has a second portion called Acts of the Apostles, and he makes all these writings. The one thing that's very interesting about Luke that we have a tendency not to notice or to overskirt is that he's actually, out of the four, he's the only one that's not a Jewish writer. He isn't Jewish at all. He's a Samaritan, but he's not just any type of Samaritan. He's a physician. He's a doctor. And to be a doctor at that time, you had to be detailed. You had to be precise with notes. And not just that, but you had to be able to read the most boring and tedious literature known to man and be able to expound on it. If you were to read some of the medical digests at that time, it's fascinating on the different types of urine that can be talked about and studied. And he would have had to research that. And he would have had to know good urine from bad urine and be able to detail that. And I'm not really sure how you do that, but that's what they did in the medical profession back then. So only in this context we can have that discussion. So when we read this and we step into that, try not to think about pee, but to think about, to hear the words and to let them sit on you. And there's a specific point in which I'll reiterate. Go ahead, Jen.
When the hour came, Jesus and his apostles reclined at the table, and he said to them, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I will not eat it again until it finds fulfillment in the kingdom of God. And after taking the cup, he gave thanks, and he said, Take this and divide it among you. For I tell you, I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes. And he took the bread, gave thanks, broke it, and gave it to them, saying, This is my body, given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And in the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you.
Thank you, John. He states that I am very eager to do this with you. A lot of times we go through the motions of communion and we hear this verse and we recognize the end and a portion of the middle. But what I want to focus on is the fact that there's an action taking place in which Jesus is eager to do this with his disciples, to do this with the 12. That you personhood is what I want to focus on, because I feel like it encompasses communion in a grand scale. And sometimes we have a tendency to miss it. And I just want to connect us with it, with the people that would be at this table. This is Leonardo da Vinci's painting of the Last Supper, and I think it's beautiful because they are having the Passover meal. And the Passover meal is traditional, and it's to remind us of certain things. It's very textual. It's very physical. And there's a physicalness that needs to be brought to the table in which they're all having this discussion, and they're physically going through it. When we view this would be like Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner, Easter even. And I love this painting because of so many reasons. And I love using art in a lesson because sometimes words fail us where pictures don't. And what's beautiful about this photo is this is our family at Thanksgiving, right? You have Thomas saying, no, Trayvon Martin is not the best basketball player. And then you have Judas being like, what? You have all these interactions that are happening here. And it looks like a mess of people. And that's beautiful to me. We have these people that sit at our tables, right? We have family gatherings. Thanksgiving, the two things, right, you don't want to talk about are babies' names, right, and sports teams. No, we don't want to talk about religion or politics. But that's what's happening here. It's a discussion on a demographic scale. And I want to talk to you, I want to show you some of these characters that take communion, that come to the table that we take as well. We first look at the first three. First three are interesting in and of themselves, where we have James the Greater. That kind of has an expletive in and of itself, the fact that James is the greater. So you kind of see his personhood in his name. You have John, which is his brother, his younger brother. He's supposed to be one of the youngest that's sitting at the table. Now, James and John, what's interesting about them is that they are actually owners of the ships that Peter fishes off of. They would be prominent families in Jewish communities. They were the upper echelon of the Jewish community. They're the ones that get Peter in to be able to see the crucifixion, or able to see the requesting of Jesus. It's their family. They have some political clout at the synagogue. And we see this in our daily life, right? These are the people that live in our community that own the businesses that we work for. Now we have the third guy down. The third guy down is Andrew. I love Andrew in the fact of who he is as a person by his actions and not by his words. Because Andrew, primarily in the Gospels, you see him as an actor and a constant responder. And that's awesome. And to understand more about Andrew is that you have to understand that he was a first follower of John the Baptized. John the Baptizer. Now, what makes it interesting is the fact is that what you have to realize is he works for James and John. So that means he goes to work a third shift at night fishing, because they fish at night, because that's when you're going to get most of your bounty and so on and so forth. And then after his shift is over, instead of going to bed, he goes into the desert to listen to John preach. So he has this rigorous schedule. He's the one that brings Peter to Jesus. He's the one that Philip goes to first to bring the Greeks to Jesus. And that's very unique. Because he's the people in our congregation that are our hands and our feet. He's the workers. He's the one that we don't see his words, we see his actions. And I find that really cool about him, about his personhood. Our next three, I love, I did this deliberately in such a way that I put the two youngest guys in between the big hairy dude. Because it really shows how young these guys are. The first one that you see is Thomas. And Thomas, we always call him the doubter, but he really gets that as a bad predicate. Where in such the way, he needs to be called, he's more or less Thomas the realist. He's Thomas in such the way that he's calling all of the 12 to view the situation that they're in. When they go to Lazarus' tomb, Jesus says, he talks about this idea of what's going to happen. And Thomas, for some reason, thinks that they're going to die. And he's okay with it. This comment is, all right, if we're going to die, let's get it over, let's go. He's one of the only 12 that kind of has that realism. When after the crucifixion and everybody's excited about Jesus coming back, he brings them back to the point of, no, I want to see it. I don't want to talk about the illusion of it, guys. I don't know if this is your grief, but I want to see it. And it happens. He's a stark realist. We have those realists here. They show us things that sometimes we miss. Now, the next guy is Bartholomew, and he's a big, hairy man. And he's kind of our quintessential farmer. He has to be stuck in the city because that's where he sells his crops. He's the one that makes the statement about Jesus, what good things come out of Galilee. Now we have this. This is our notion in Michigan. We have these notions in Michigan where, if we're a State fan or we're a U of M fan, we make the easy assertion of, what good things would come out of Ohio. Right? Like, we have this combative understanding with Ohio State, and we don't like them. And we have that assertion. But we do know one good thing did come out of Ohio, and that's Ben. Yeah. See, the speed limit may be bad, and the roads may be good, but we got Ben. Okay? A little Christ assertion right there. And we have that. We have that notion of what comes out of this demographic, because the city is stinky. We're in the country. The air is fresh, and the air is abounding. So then we step into our third character in this lineup of Philip. And Philip is interesting in such the way that he does not have any other Jewish names. He actually doesn't have a Jewish name at all. There's no predicate besides his first name of Philip. And what we have to look at in that is that Philip is not a Jewish name, it is a Greek name. And it's not just any Greek name, but it is Philip of Macedon. Philip of Macedon was one of the first Greek rulers that came out of Macedonia, and he had a kid that was kind of famous. His name's Alexander the Great. I think of him as the pretty good. But he was kind of significant in history. And they kind of had what was referred to as the Hellenistic period. And there were Jews that during the diaspora, they would take on that Hellenistic idea. And his family stands out of the 12 because not only did they take on those Hellenistic ideas, is that they named their child. They named their child specifically a Greek name. So Philip stands out drastically out of the 3, or even out of the 12. Because he can't be hidden anywhere. You have a lineup of Jewish names, then you got Philip. Named after a not-so-popular conqueror with one eye. It's not attractive. But even in 6 people, we see a giant demographic that happens. We see the upper echelon of the social ladder. We see the lower portion of the social ladder. And then we even see how the city separates. We see also an age dynamic of older and younger. But we move to our next 3, and our next 3 are interesting to me in such the way that Thaddeus Jude has a lot of suspicion around him in the fact that no one would really work with their family. He's always argued in the fact that he is the younger sibling of Jesus, half-brother. And you guys know this. It's nice to see your family once a week, but really living with them and working with them are a whole other story, right? Like, I kind of dread that one. I'm Armenian, and going to work with a bunch of dirty Armenians is very frustrating because seeing them at Thanksgiving and saying, hey, you guys are great, but having to work with my cousin Roger is a whole other story. And don't even get me started on Uncle David. But needless to say, that was rough. And there's a testament that needs to be said here, is the fact that Jude is with his brother. Jude in his book testifies to his brother. And he's very stark. He's sharp with his words. And his book is the shortest book because he wants to get to the point. And he wants to testify to his sanctity of his brother. Now, the other 2 that we come to, we have a tendency that we really don't want to skirt this. And I want to draw a lot of light to this because these are 2 people that are demographically on the right and left. Because in this 12, not only do we have different ages and different socioeconomics, but we have way different political parties. And political tension is hot. Now, when we look at Matthew And Simon, we have to realize that these are just like Democrats and Republicans. They're drastically on opposite sides. There's no middle ground that they're going to touch on. Matthew is a perfect example of the fact that he has bought in to the Roman Empire and the fact that he's a tax collector. And he's not just any tax collector, but he's a tax collector on goods and services. And the only way that he would have gotten that post is if he would have been a part of the Herodian dynasty or been able to be imparted upon by the Herodian dynasty. And now the Herodian dynasty, which you have to understand, is they're the ones that are the Jewish political party that sided with the Romans. They're the ones that that Herod the Great comes out of. That they're part Jewish and part Roman. So he funds, with his tax dollars, the political machine. And when you tax goods and services, the thing that's interesting about that is that it's not just going up to a house and looking through a sheet and saying, oh, you owe your 15%. But he's the guy in the marketplace that's shady. You know that guy. I'm related to probably a couple of those guys. And that is the guy that comes in the truck at the weigh station and he looks through the goods. And he says, there's something back there that's shiny and expensive, and I want to know how much you're selling it for, because I'm going to tax you on it. And he's that guy. So he's with the people. He's elbow to elbow with them. Right next to him, we have the other side of the spectrum. Simon the Zealot is interesting in the fact that he gets stuck with the AKA of being referred to as a zealot as his political party. It's like being referred to as like so-and-so the Republican or so-and-so the Democrat. You buy into it so much that you want your name attached to it. And Simon the Zealot, to understand what the Zealot people, or the Zealot political party did, is that they felt that the only thing that was good about Rome was to get rid of them. And they did it by any means possible. They did it through either underground wars. They did it through private assassinations. They did anything they possibly could to get rid of the Roman establishment, and that was the goal. And you have to understand the tension that has to happen at this dinner party, at this Passover meal. And we've only gotten to 9 of them. Okay? You guys think your Thanksgivings are rough about who gets the chicken leg or the turkey leg. But these men are at the same table. And the thing is that Jesus says, I look forward to this meal. I look forward to this action with you and to do it with you. And I find that interesting. We move on to the last 3. And the last 3, I find brilliant. And I don't put them at the end for any other reason is that they're our talking point to get to. Because there are 3 unknowns, or we have 3 things that we put upon these people, that we put our own ideas upon them. We don't need to, we have a tendency not to know a whole lot about the apostles, but these 3, we have a tendency to have our own ideas about them. Now, our first one is James the Lesser. And the thing is you can read every apologist. You can read a lot of theologians, historians, everybody. And the problem with James the Lesser is he fits the name. He's kind of the lesser, and we don't know a whole lot about him. We just know his family was there during the crucifixion, and we kind of got some idea of who he kind of is. We hear his name mentioned a lot. We see his action in history. But the biblical account doesn't have a whole lot of him. He is a face without a personality. And he's the person that sits in these seats. Or sometimes he's the person that doesn't sit in these seats. Sometimes he's the person that is a beautiful representation of the one that we put our own ideas, that we put our own actions into. He's the faceless, or he's He puts the face to the people that we don't know about, but we have an idea. He's the immigrant that we want to charge with our hostilities. He's the negative person that sometimes that we need to remember that they're humans. And that those are the people we need to invite in. But they're not just the ones on the outside. Like I said earlier, they're sometimes the ones on the inside. The ones that we don't know. We just see them on a Sunday. We only interact with them at this motion, at the passing. But I want to call you to understand that they're the ones sitting at the table. They're the ones that you want to talk to at the table so that they don't just become a face. We move to Peter, and Peter is interesting because we always see Peter at the high points. We love Peter because we're just like, oh, he's great, he's such a bull in a china shop. But Peter, in and of himself, we forget that he's a yutz 90% of the time. That he inserts his foot so much in his mouth that his tongue is like a cloth of cleaning. He's got nice toes because of it. You know, the thing is with Peter is that, remember, he's the one that Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. But he comes out of an understanding that he's always been the worker. He's always been the guy that's been in the back of the boat doing the hard labor. One of the nicest, one of the readings of Peter is that he's in the back of the boat, and when he sees Jesus, he puts on his clothes and then hops in the water to go eat fish with them. And in that mindset, you have to understand, how hard are you working to where you're not wearing clothes? Just going to put that outlier in your mind. He may be naked. But the thing about him is that we see him in a constant progression, growing into the person he needs to be. At the beginning, we have a tendency just to see him for what he is. But we watch his growth all the way into the New Testament, even in his letters, even how he handles Paul. And sometimes we forget about that with people here. We sometimes just make a statement about, oh, that person's grouchy or that person's young, but we forget about the fact that we forget about, first off, where they came from, and then how they grow into the person that they need to be. Now, the other thing that we look at is we look at the last person. And this is the person that we always stick out. Right? When you see Leonardo's photo of the Last Supper, what's the first thing you want to know where it is? Where's Judas? I always say it's the person next to my father. But Judas is the guy we always want to pick out. And I had to buy this icon on digital download because this is the only icon in which you see Judas as a human. You see Judas as a person. Now, Leonardo was the first person to ever capitalize this because any other time, any other renderings of Judas, they were to make him less than human. The people wanted to distort and take away his humanity. But the problem is that Judas was fully human. And we have a lot of things that we think about Judas without knowing. And sometimes when we step back and view Judas as a controversial figure, we sometimes ask certain questions. And sometimes we don't like those questions because they have a tendency to maybe reflect on us. Like we have a tendency to ask, if he took the money, then why didn't he keep it? Why the remorse to give it back? We need to ask the question of what fills a person with so much remorse that they cause them to take their own. Then we need to ask another personal question of why is it that we want to take Judas's humanity away from him? Why is it that we need to make him out to be a monster? When sometimes we do the same things to Jesus that Judas did. Because what does Judas do? Judas gets Jesus to a point in which a revolution can happen, right? He takes the money to fund it. He gets the Roman guards there. And think about it like this. Jesus not only can feed 5,000, that's a good military advantage, right? But he can heal anybody that gets sick or hurt or lame. Another military advantage. And what does Jesus do? Or what does Judas do? Judas gets the Roman government there. All of them. And he puts Jesus in a corner. And you don't put baby in a corner. That's another thing. But you don't. He puts Jesus in that corner expecting something's going to happen. And you know what? It's the revolution. The war's going to happen. We're going to wipe out all the Romans. And we get to do this here and now in Galilee. But it doesn't happen like that. And Jesus does this to us, doesn't he? He has a tendency to do one of the things that we don't think. Something that doesn't come natural. Where he offers himself up. Where he has them put down the weapons. Where he responds in love. Where sometimes it's so easy to respond in violence. Sometimes we don't like to look at Judas because sometimes we're the one that distorts it. We look at these 12 and a framework of who sits at that table, who sits and who comes to our table. Sometimes it's nice to have the greater, the James the Graders, the ones that own the businesses, that can supply the money, that can help. Sometimes we're not sure, but it's always good to have the Andrews to do the work that we don't want. Right? When we look at these 12, we look at these 12 in a representation of our body. And that's what he's trying to show us. Because Jesus is delighted to do this with these 12. To have different ages of demographics, different socio views, different political understandings, all sit and argue at this table. Next Sunday, I hit the wrong button again. Next Sunday, we're going to come here to this place. We are going to stand up out of our complacency, rise up out of the seats, and we're going to do a physical act. That physical act will be irritating because it will cause us to bump into one another. It'll cause us to interact with one another and not just sit. And I think there's something beautiful about that when we view our communion. Because, again, words do fail us. And the one thing that I love about it, that we take communion every Sunday, but this one, is that this action does not fail us. Is that we come and we stand. And some of us move slower than others. Some of us move faster than others. Some of us have children that are knocking us down. But this is the life and blood and living organism of this place that we call community, that we call church. And that we come down this center aisle and we do this one thing that we agree on together. This one action. And that we may be so drastically different from one another. But this is the one thing that we do as a body. And it's represented in these 12. And we need to ask ourselves, who do we have at our table? Who do we need to be encouraged to then to talk to at our table? Who are the faceless? Who are the ones that we put our own conditions on? Because when we look at these 12, we see a rainbow of differences. We see a rainbow of people. that come together for one meal, one physical meal, one meal that fills us. So today we're going to have a moment of silence, and then I'll pray and we will exit this building. And next week we will come. And when we come, we will converge down this aisle. And rejoice when you hear the baby noises. Rejoice when the kids bump you. Rejoice that the line may not move as fast as you want it to. But think on it and dwell on it.